Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us in celebrating the release of Arizona Foundation for Women's 2020 Status of Women in Arizona Research Report. I am Monica Lindstrom, board member of this incredible nonprofit that strives to push the needle forward for the betterment of women in our state. AFW is hopeful this report will serve as a primary resource for legislators, nonprofits, and local community leaders to guide decisions around pressing issues affecting women here in our state. The information in the report is a product of those authors who work every day, just like AFW, to drive awareness and catalyze social change for the betterment of women. Our speakers today are also dedicated to educating the community and empowering women to improve their lives and those of their children, families, and communities. This afternoon, you will hear from many dynamic individuals giving insight into the pressing safety, health, and economic empowerment issues women in our state are facing. In fact, the report concludes with a sobering look into the tsunami effects of COVID that will be felt for years to come. We will wrap up today's event with a Q&A of our esteemed panelists and a heartfelt message from AFW. Now, during the presentation, should you have any questions, please use the comment box located right below the slideshow. You will notice your video box enlarging when someone starts speaking. It should minimize again, but if you'd like, you can simply click and drag on the right side of the video box to resize it, and you can do that with any of the boxes that you see. We ask for your indulgence and patience in the event there are any technological hiccups. Again, thank you so much for joining AFW today on the release of our 2020 Status of Women in Arizona Research Report. Let's get started with hearing from the driving force behind AFW, our CEO, Misha Davis.
Hello, everyone. I'm Misha Davis, CEO of Arizona Foundation for Women, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening as we release the 2020 Status of Women in Arizona Research Report. At AFW, our mission is simple. It's to advance the status of Arizona's women through research, advocacy, and philanthropy to ensure their safety, health, and economic independence. And our foundation excels at identifying unmet needs and developing the initiatives and methods to address these needs. And this approach allows the foundation to tackle the issues of Arizona women from a broader and more macro perspective. And through our advocacy work, we're able to bring awareness to legislation in Arizona that has the potential to either hurt or help women and children. Our philanthropy efforts ensure that our boots-on-the-ground service providers, such as domestic violence shelters, have the resources to serve every woman in need. And we are so excited. In 2020, we were able to celebrate our 25th year as an organization, and over the years, we have advanced greatly. But as we know, there's always room for improvement. And this research report is one of our greatest tools for assessing the areas in which Arizona succeeds and the areas that are in need of more awareness and more resources. And with these reports completed every 4 years, we're benchmarking how far the needle has moved within the areas of safety, health, and economic independence of women in Arizona. So I'm excited because you being here tonight, it shows your commitment to the AFW vision, and I hope you find this report very influential and that you carry the information with you into your communities across Arizona and beyond.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Maureen Buceletti, Vice Chair for the Arizona Foundation for Women Board of Directors. We are so glad that you could join us today. As Misha said, our foundation began 25 years ago in 1995 at a time when less than 4% of all philanthropic dollars in Arizona were spent on issues affecting women and girls. It was our founders and now our goal to change this trajectory through research, advocacy, and grant making. And today, we're focusing on our research. In 2010, we published Arizona Women, a status update offering a database snapshot of the standing of Arizona women across the areas of safety, health, and economic empowerment. This was followed in 2016 with a refreshed and expanded scope of benchmark data. Many opportunities remain, and this past year, the pandemic has amplified areas of concern that uniquely impact women, as we've seen a sharp rise in domestic violence and a reduction in career advancement, as women try to balance the demands of work with the majority of caregiving responsibilities both at home and across the healthcare industry. Melinda Gates, who has been a champion for women's equality, said, "When people try to be cheerful about working from home and social distancing by noting that William Shakespeare and Isaac Newton did some of their best work while England was ravaged by the plague, there's an obvious response. Neither of them had child care responsibilities." With this 2020 report, we want to build awareness and engage women and men in Arizona in a dialogue that will influence policies and trigger long-term positive change. The report features personal stories and testimonials from your fellow community members, so you can visualize how the data and trends personally affect women in our state. Whether it's your mother, sister, grandmother, or daughter, we believe that when women are empowered, we measurably improve the lives of children, families, and communities. And today, we hope to inspire and mobilize all of you by sharing our research results. American scholar and research professor at the University of Houston, Brene Brown, has remarked that stories are simply data with a soul. And I want to thank the following chapter authors who graciously shared their stories and expertise for the report, including Amanda Aguirre, Alika Kumar, Belinda Barclay White, Dr. Cassia Spahn, Eric Bauer, Elizabeth Ayers-Clough, John Eliason, and Letitia Fry. We are also fortunate to include firsthand quotes from some influential local leaders, including Arizona women in high levels of leadership across our state. We want to thank you for lending your voices to the AFW mission. I would also like to thank the community leaders who are joining us today: Nancy Tengler, Dr. Julia Files, and January Contreras. You'll be hearing more from them in a moment. And finally, this report wouldn't be possible without the help of our volunteers and partner organizations, including Pure Insurance, Rosenden, Southwest Airlines, City of Phoenix Public Works, Kefi Catalyst, and our designer Austin Griblin from East Ivy Designs. We hope the AFW Status of Women in Arizona research report is the right blend of facts and narrative to connect our communities, minds, and hearts. Together, we can make a difference.
Thank you, Misha and Maureen. The economic empowerment of women is a hot topic of late in the media, and rightly so. In the report, Alika Kumar explains the economic impacts of gender and race-based wage disparities that exist in our state. The financial empowerment of women can help minimize those disparities. And yes, there is a wage gap. That gap leads to women's inability to accumulate wealth and become a burden on the economic system. Nancy Tengler is the Chief Investment Officer at Laffer Tengler Investments and knows firsthand just how important it is for women to be economically empowered. With that strength comes healthier and safer lives, families, and communities. You will find her advice invaluable.
Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Nancy Tengler. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Laffer Tengler Investments here in Arizona, in Scottsdale, and the author of the Women's Guide to Successful Investing, as well as a regular columnist for USA Today on this very subject of women and investing and finances. I'm happy to be here for the AFW 2020 release report, and I'd like to speak to you about women and money and our relationship to it. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Women have inconveniently excused themselves from the conversation when it comes to finances. Our financial providers tend to see us as less attractive target clients because they don't believe we have significant investable assets. And they know that we don't really enjoy managing our wealth and that we tend to delegate those decisions to our partner or others. The last two items we can change, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. A study shown that was done by UBS shows that women in all age categories, 20 to 34, 35 to 50, and 51 years old and older, defer the financial decision-making to another member of their household. And millennials, sadly, are doing this at an even greater rate than baby boomers. So that's a problem for many reasons, but most importantly, it's a problem because we tend to be better educated than our parents, and we have much more greater opportunity for productivity. And by that, I mean, according to Cato Institute, American women spent 44 hours per week in food preparation in 1910. By 2008, that number dropped to just 1 hour per week. Women spent 11.5 hours per week on laundry in the 1920s. Today, we spend less than 2 hours per week on laundry. And if you're lucky like me and have a partner that does that, you spend 0. But we're not engaged in busy work as we used to be. And consequently, we have a lot more opportunity to be engaged in our financial future. Here's the second reason that's so important. In 2018 in the United States, the average life expectancy for men was 76 years of age. But the average life expectancy for women was 81 years of age. We tend to live 5 years longer than our male counterparts, which means that we need more money than men to retire comfortably, and we need to be smart about it as we go through our earning years. Another piece of sort of dire news is that the average age a woman is widowed if she's married in the U.S. is 59 years old. So if you take that data point and you add to that we tend to live to be 81, that's a lot of time on our own. If we were married and if we were single our entire life, we've got 81 years of singlehood where we need to plan for the future. Most women are surprised by this fact. I was 59 years old when I was widowed. It was shocking to me. I felt young, and I still feel young, and it's a long road. But here's another piece of data that is also going to be a little bit sobering. The average age a woman becomes divorced for the first time is at age 30. This is important because if we're deferring the financial decisions to our spouse or partner, this is problematic if we end up on our own at age 30 or ultimately at all. I think what keeps us out of the discussion is that we tend to think that investing, finances are out of our purview, that we weren't educated, and that would be correct. The National Council on Economic Education administered a test where the average in economics, just a basic economics test, where the average American adult earned a C and the average high school student flunked entirely. So we're not being taught these things, but that doesn't mean we can't teach ourselves. So one of the things that women prove to be is excellent savers. And actually over 70% of us characterize ourselves as savers. We are very good at that part of the financial equation, but the only way to ensure that we have enough wealth to live comfortably until we're 81 years old, no matter what our income level is today. And I should point out, I should have pointed this out at the beginning. I came from a divorced family. My mother worked 2 jobs my entire childhood. My dad left, I think, when I was in the 4th grade. I began working at the age of 11. At that time, it would have been babysitting and house cleaning my friend's parents' home, which was a little bit difficult if you're going through those awkward preteen years. But then I went on to have a job at a department store and then at a newspaper. I've worked my entire life. I understand what it is to come from nothing and how hard it is to save even $1 in some cases. So that's why I want to talk to you about the importance of doing that. Because saving in these very low interest rate environment is not going to get you where you need to go, but saving to invest is going to get you there. This was not available when I was young. You had to have a lot of money to open a brokerage account. You had to trade in 100 share blocks. There are no trading costs anymore. You can open a brokerage account with $0 and the promise to contribute a modest amount of money every month, $25 or $50. So investing is now accessible to every American, every woman, and no matter what your financial wherewithal or status is. So I always tell people that wealth accumulation is an attitude. Financial independence is achieved through two distinct disciplines, saving and then investing. And that's what I want to continue to reinforce in our few minutes that we have together. Many women in particular don't want to invest because they think investing is gambling. They sometimes refer to it as magic, a game. Now you can do it virtually, so it feels even more like a game, except now a virtual game. And I want to dissuade you from that view. So one of the important things that women don't understand is that just by the nature of who we are and the way our brains work, we actually make better investors than men. It's been empirically proven via studies, but it's also based on the way we do things. So women tend to do more research, and that makes sense because we do more research in all aspects of our lives, whether it's, which doctor to take our kids to, which school they should go to, what products we should be using to keep ourselves healthy. Women just tend to do more research, and that's been supported by research studies time and time again. In fact, the number is that we tend to do 60% more research than men before we make a decision. The second reason we make great investors is that we tend to take less risk than men. There was a landmark study done in 2001 called Boys Will Be Boys, Gender Overconfidence in Common Stock Investing. And we found that men trade much more because they're sort of on a testosterone-driven need to beat others, and that's actually the words that the study used. But women actually were not as competitive, and we earned 1% per year more than our male counterparts. And this was real data, real people over a 10-year period. We also are much more willing to change our minds. And according to the National Council for Research on Women, women make decisions based on a more comprehensive collection of data, and we're willing to consider ideas that may be contradictory to our original assumptions. We also make better investors even in the risk-on hedge fund industry. Women returned 9% per year compared to 5.8% per year for their male counterparts, and this was from 2000 to 2009. And lastly, women are natural multitaskers. So I don't really have to tell you that most men operate in one brain hemisphere at a time. They tend to be very sequential, and we're jumping back and forth between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere as we accumulate data and make decisions. That's actually been demonstrated by a UCLA study, and it happens to be very compatible with making an excellent investor. So I'm going to give you one final example, and that is Stephanie Muka. So Stephanie Muka was a nurse. She died in 2018 at 101 years old. She made her first investment with her husband. It was 50 shares of Medtronic. She used the products at work for $5.11 a share. They held it for 26 years, and their $255 investment grew to $459,000. That's because the stocks, grew, and the company paid a dividend and grew the dividend. But it wasn't until 5 years after Stephanie's husband died, and she was 57 years old and retired, that she began managing their portfolio. She weathered bear markets and bull markets because she retired from nursing in 1993. She was adding to her portfolio on a fixed income. So think low income. And she bought what she knew, and before she died, Stephanie gave away $5 million. So I hope that's an encouragement to you. It is to me, and it was to me as a young woman. I had no money, and I just started investing at a very young age because I thought it was interesting. And now I do it professionally and have done so for 35 plus years. My passion is to educate women, particularly women who don't think they have access, because in today's world, you have access to research I used to have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for, and you have access to brokerage accounts where you trade for free. And you can buy 1/10 of one share. You can buy one share. We used to have a lot of money to invest. So anyway, it's an encouragement to me that AFW exists, and I'm just thrilled and honored to be part of the 2020 release report.
Thank you, Nancy, for those empowering suggestions. In the time of COVID, much focus has been placed on the health of Arizonans. In fact, you cannot watch TV, listen to the radio, or drive on the roads without seeing and hearing advice on how to protect yourself and your family. Women's health and their access to health have been a problem in Arizona long before COVID touched our lives. In the report, Amanda Aguirre attempts to shed light on the need for and lack of affordable health care here in Arizona. She also explains there is little or no physical access to health care for many women outside of Maricopa County. There is simply no excuse for this. Another concern the report sheds light on, with the help of Elizabeth Clough and Dr. Belinda White, has to do with early screening for breast cancer and how it has been impacted by COVID. Up next, we have Dr. Julia Files, who discusses women's health and the goal of finding graceful imbalance.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Julia Files, and I am a consultant in internal medicine at Mayo Clinic in Arizona, and also a professor of medicine at the Mayo Clinic College of Medicine. And I appreciate the invitation to speak to you today at the Arizona Foundation for Women. And I was asked to speak related to my expertise in women's health issues, where I have done a lot of my academic work on gender issues, and also my experience taking care of women as a women's health expert. But where I think my greatest qualification lies to speak to you today is through my experience as being a working mother. I have so far successfully raised 3 children who are contributing members to society, and I hope to impart to you today some lessons that I learned through the School of Hard Knocks and some experiences that we can share through our collective experiences as women physicians, and through the understanding that we have obtained through our academic research. Not to mention my many, many hours in the clinic talking to working women. So let's take a first step forward. So what we're talking about today are issues that are important in women's health. You know, things that are unique to women: menstruation, childbearing, that's pretty obvious. But some things that are more serious among women aren't quite as obvious. And one of the things that is much more serious in women in 2020 and 2021 is the COVID-19 pandemic. There are significant gender differences in how this pandemic and the world have impacted women. I'd like to bring your attention to this lovely young woman, Alexandra, who's a trauma ICU nurse. And she's been working with COVID patients since the beginning of the pandemic in February. And her experience has informed a lot of my view of the pandemic. And I know very much about this young woman because she is my daughter, Alexandra. And I'm very proud of her, but this has not been an easy time. So if we step back and think about women and the pandemic, we want to look at pre-pandemic life. And we know from our research and from many studies that there were very many gender inequities prior to everything that's happened to us this year. We know there's a wage gap. We know that availability of child care affects employment of mothers more than fathers. We know that women are the primary caregivers for elder members of the family. And unfortunately, even in 2020/2021, our up-to-date research has demonstrated that in families, domestic responsibilities are borne more heavily by women, even in dual-income families. And we know that leadership roles are not as available to women as they are to men across multiple domains. My area of expertise lies in academic medicine, and the prevalence of women in leadership in academic medicine is lower than that of their male colleagues. But I do know that our findings in academic medicine have broad applicability across other professions and other places. So what about the pandemic? Well, unfortunately, job losses have hit women harder than men. And some of that has to do with the fact that more women are in service-related jobs, which translates to more furloughs and more frontline exposures because healthcare is populated by women and childcare is populated by women who work in the field. Unfortunately, women of color are at the intersection of the inequities. Not only do we know that there are inequities related to race and discriminatory policies and behaviors, but then you add in gender, and we call that an intersection of inequity. Given the fact that we've already discussed that women carry the larger share of domestic responsibilities, let's be very real. Those domestic responsibilities during the pandemic have amplified. They haven't lessened. And in addition, we are now having to deal with homeschooling our children because schools have closed. Many of us are working from home while we're homeschooling our children. And in many cities and towns throughout the United States, childcare has evaporated. But there have been amplified needs for extended family care as our elders are more isolated and isolating from exposure to the COVID-19 virus. And many of you are probably familiar with the term work-life balance, which we believe to be an antiquated terminology because really there is no such thing as work-life balance. Who are we kidding? A better term, we think, would be work-life integration, because what has happened is the boundaries between family and work are blurred, and the pandemic has further amplified this. I thought this quote was quite helpful. And look, this was from 2004. We need better ways to manage work-life boundaries, understanding that we are subject to phases, often dictated by events out of our control, the pandemic, in which our work lives and our personal lives ebb and flow in their demands. But it's not all gloom and doom. We know that having these multiple roles has benefits. It gives us opportunities to enrich our interpersonal skills. There are a lot of psychological benefits. If you think about it, if things aren't going well at work, you have a different locus of centering and in home, and you can think about your home and be much happier. But when things go awry at home, you can return to work where you have a little more control and things are going well. So there's benefits to having multiple roles. So hold that thought. And let's think about this in terms of anthropology. So we know that historically humans lived in generational hierarchies. This means that they lived in multi-generational units that were not only vertical but horizontal. So there were cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, everyone working together in a family unit and tending children, raising children, and surviving. And in modern day, a lot of that has been lost. Many of us have moved away from our nuclear families, and we are living in homes by ourselves where we don't have generational support, and we're trying to do all of the things that it takes to survive and thrive by ourselves. And so I would like to introduce you to a term that we have coined in our work here at Mayo Clinic, working with women on gender inequity and medicine, motherhood, and madness. And that's the term finding graceful imbalance. You know, I don't think you can ever find work-life balance. All we can hope for is momentary spots where we are gracefully imbalanced between the pull of home and the pull of work. And when we tip to one side, I want to remind you, you will self-right and you'll come back to the center. And if you get pulled in the other direction, just be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself, and know that you will come back up. And embrace those moments of graceful imbalance because they make you who you are and they make you very effective in all the multiple roles that you are called to address each day. And so think of this darling little seagull, because the seagull is exhibiting to us the perfect equilibrium of work and personal time, which is graceful imbalance. And remember, although balance becomes harder to attain in a time when we're always reachable through email and text messaging, you need to try and find a better way to integrate the demands of work and life and find your graceful imbalance. And with that, I will end and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. Please vaccinate. It is a wonder of modern medicine that we have this opportunity to deal with this pandemic with tools that can protect us in the future. And here I am getting my vaccine, and here I am in my personal protective gear in the emergency department, which I hope not to use too often. But anyway, thank you very much. Have a great day. And if you need to talk to me, here's my email.
Thank you, Dr. Files. Your reframing of a perfect life-work balance is refreshing and forgiving. Safety has, and unfortunately will always be, a main concern for women of all ages. Sexual violence is a reality women face regardless of age or wealth. As Dr. Cassia Spahn explains in the report, rape myths still abound and are deeply seated in our culture. Coupled with that, Eric Bauer points out sex trafficking is a danger that we simply cannot ignore, especially being a border state and with the advancement of technology. One ray of hope is our own Maricopa County Attorney's Office. As John Elison, our chairman, points out in the report, there was a significant backlog of rape kits that needed to be tested right here. Due to the hard work of MCAO in receiving grants and staying laser focused, Maricopa County's backlog of 4,500 kits has been completely tested, making it a leader in the country. To tell us more about the safety of women in Arizona is January Contreras, managing attorney with Arizona Legal Women and Youth Services, also known as Always.
Hi, I'm January Contreras, and I'm very happy today to join Arizona Foundation for Women as they release their 2020 research report. I have been a supporter and a grantee of Arizona Foundation for Women for many years now. And the work that they do is very important to the safety, to the health, and to the economic empowerment and stability of women. So very glad to see this 2020 research report coming out. In my role, I am a lawyer and a former prosecutor, and I've been running a legal aid center for the last 7 years. And one of the areas that we work in the most that has a lot to do with the research and the mission of Arizona Foundation for Women has to do with the safety of women and kids. In our work at Arizona Legal Women and Youth Services, we go by Always. We're free lawyers to kids and young adults dealing with abuse, human trafficking, the foster care system, and homelessness. And domestic violence and human trafficking are two of the very difficult situations that we often see, in addition to sexual assault types of crimes. And I really want to focus on the two areas of domestic violence and human trafficking because of the high number of people that we serve who face those really traumatic crimes, those really difficult situations, and what can be done that helps us prevent that as well as respond to the survivors and their families. First, talking about domestic violence. As the research report highlights, Arizona has a lot of work to do still in order to support our survivors of domestic violence and to help prevent the worst consequences of domestic violence. Right now, we are in a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, and what we've seen, unfortunately, is the rate of domestic violence-related deaths just in the city of Phoenix jumped by 180% before, as compared to the previous year. So we're looking at the rate of death by domestic violence skyrocketing here in Arizona. Just looking at the city of Phoenix number, we know that it has risen by 180%. That should shock us. And it should shock us into action, quite frankly. A statistic that is highlighted in the AFW report is that Arizona is in the top 10 states for a list we don't want to be on, and that's for the highest rates of women murdered by men. We can take action. We have seen in our state legislature bipartisan support for some legislation that would start to make a dent in this, that could start to move us in the direction of keeping people and women safe. These are some simple and very important foundations that we need to build in Arizona. I hope to see the bipartisan support for these bills continue and that they can actually become law in Arizona. The other thing we have to realize, and this is true for domestic violence, it's true for human trafficking as well. When we talk about public safety, what we have to remember is that public safety is more than just the criminal justice system. There are supports that we can put in place in advance, not for every situation, but for some situations that will make a difference because it allows people more freedom, more choices, more opportunity to try to get out of very dangerous situations. And I'll just give you an example. One of the cases that I worked on involved a victim right here in Arizona who had gone through a lot in her home behind closed doors. She was constantly threatened that if she left or if she called the police, that her kids would be taken from her. She was abused often. She never called the police, but her neighbors did. And when her neighbors called the police repeatedly, at one point, police showed up and said, "We can't leave you here anymore." And so she quickly got a bag. She put some belongings in it for her and her children. And the police took her to a domestic violence shelter and they helped her get an order of protection. This was really a frightening time for her because she didn't know what was next. She was worried in the back of her mind, these threats to take her kid, was that going to come true? She was worried about how she would survive and, of course, just worried about how she would be safe. And so there were a lot of things that came together to support her and her kids. It was, number one, the domestic violence shelter. It was, number two, the police who said, you know, you can't be safe here anymore. We need to make sure that you go somewhere else. It was the order of protection that happened for her through our courts very quickly. It became things like food stamps and long-term housing once she got out of the domestic violence shelter. I mean, these are all the things that came together that gave her an option to live violence-free. As crazy as that sounds, because everyone should have the right to live a life free of violence, not everybody feels that they can. And so the work of AFW does support the work of Always, and it's just one example of how this all ties together. And we're really in these fights together. Now, when it comes to human trafficking, we represent human trafficking survivors at Always, both who are coming in with immigrant status or no status, as well as domestic survivors. And those scenarios can look a little different from one another. So we may see, we see a lot more labor trafficking out of our victims and survivors who have been brought here from other countries, whether that's massage parlor or hotel worker or people who are forced to work in homes as domestic servants. When it comes to domestic survivors, what we typically see are people being preyed upon when they're very young. It is very common for victims to be targeted because they are in the foster care system or just coming out of the foster care system. They're runaway or they're in a homeless situation. These are the kinds of young people who are in vulnerable situations that traffickers are targeting. And it's become, you know, a very horrible crime because people have figured out how to monetize the bodies of women and men as well. And so when it comes to human trafficking, you know, I have the same recommendations that we need to be talking about, which is, you know, how are we supporting our kids in the foster care system? How are we supporting them when they get out? How are we supporting families so that children don't have to be removed from their homes if they can stay there safely? Again, housing is an issue. Mental health and substance abuse services being available is an issue. Childcare is an issue, so that people are left in kids are left in safe situations. We as a community, we have the ability to really come together to help protect people, to help embrace people who are in very vulnerable situations. And I'm really proud of how far we've come. When it comes to trafficking, for example, it wasn't that long ago that survivors were oftentimes not treated as victims of crime, not treated with dignity, not provided with services for them to put their lives back together and to start to move forward. And so the fact that we as a country, as a community, have started to build the network that they need to support them is important, because it's more than rescue. It's been challenging to see, political campaigns, try to take over the human trafficking issue. Human trafficking is an issue that we should all care about, for kids and adults, for girls, for women, for boys, for men. It's something that requires all of us to help solve. So, these are some of the issues that we work on at Always. I'm very happy, as a lawyer and as a leader here in Arizona, to see the Arizona Foundation for Women continue to lead on these issues. Research is important. Data is important. For us to not look the other way, it's important that we are armed with facts. And, we are moving the ball in Arizona, but we still have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of people that are hurting, and a lot of them are women and kids, and a lot of them don't see a way out. I have a firsthand window into what happens in many homes, and they're all around us, apartment down the street, and they're in our neighbors, they're our neighbors in a suburb in Gilbert, they're everywhere. And so I hope we continue to work together. I see the AFW work, grants, and research as an important part of this. Let's keep working to bring safety to women, to bring equality, to bring security. And I think together we can do that.
Thank you, January, for fighting the good fight every day and helping women in our community. As you said, every woman deserves to feel and be safe. Now I would like to invite our distinguished panel of speakers to give their insight and some thoughtful questions based on their articles and research featured in the report. So I'd like to welcome our subject matter experts, Dr. Kassia Spahn, Alika Kumar, Elizabeth Ayers-Clough, Letitia Fry, Eric Bauer, and Susanna Southworth. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us today. All right, so our first question is for Dr. Spahn. Now, you are part of our report in the safety section, and you talk about rape myths, or you write about rape myths. In your article, you share that a lot of the rape law reform legislation from the 70s and 80s have been mostly symbolic and not led to any substantial changes in the ways in which sexual assault victims are viewed and responded to. How do you feel Arizona fares when it comes to this issue, and where do you see opportunities for action to support these victims?
Well, thank you for that question, Monica. Arizona, like many other states, has redefined the crime of rape, which traditional common law statutes defined as carnal knowledge of a woman, not one's wife, by force and against her will. Under Arizona law, sexual assault is defined as intentionally or knowingly engaging in sexual intercourse or oral sexual conduct with any person without the consent of that person. Thus, the Arizona law is gender neutral, does not require that the perpetrator use force, and does not preclude prosecution and conviction for marital rape. These are all progressive changes that bring more sexual assault victims under the protection of the law. However, Arizona is only one of a handful of states that have not completely eliminated the requirement that the victim's allegations be corroborated in order to secure a conviction for sexual assault. So the Arizona statute requires corroboration if the story is physically impossible or so incredible that no reasonable person could believe it. This probably does not apply to many cases, but there is this exception in the Arizona law. Arizona also has a rape shield law that precludes the introduction of evidence of the victim's prior sexual conduct at trial, but a little looser or weaker than the law in some other states. And I think one thing that's important to point out is that eliminating resistance and corroboration requirements as legal elements necessary to secure a conviction for sexual assault does not mean that whether the victim resisted or whether her allegations can be corroborated will not influence the decisions of police, prosecutors, judges, and jurors. As one prosecutor in Chicago told me, well, you can change the law, but you can't necessarily change people's attitudes or eliminate their biases. And similarly, an assistant district attorney in Los Angeles told me that their requirement that they will not file charges unless there's corroboration of the victim's allegations was a practical and not a legal requirement, which seems to me that that sort of is missing the point. So that's what I would say. I think that the Arizona laws are progressive in some respects and not quite as liberal as laws in some other states like Michigan and Illinois.
Well, at least we're not at the bottom like we so often are in many of these categories. And your article on rape myths in the report is just so telling, and everyone needs to see that. So here's another question for you, Doctor. In our report, we found that 41% of women in Arizona report being a victim of sexual violence, and almost half of the perpetrators were a current or former intimate partner. This fact also listed as one of your rape myths that we were just mentioning. Why do you think this widespread belief is held that most rapes are committed by strangers of the victims?
So the idea of stranger rape as real rape goes back to work by Susan Brown Miller in the 1970s and Susan Estrich in the 1980s. Susan Estrich's book, Real Rape, spells out why only certain types of sexual assaults are regarded as real rapes. And she argues that aggravated rapes are differentiated from simple rapes, and that only the aggravated rapes are viewed by the public and by many criminal justice officials as real rapes. So aggravated rapes involve a sober and credible woman who is suddenly and forcefully assaulted by a stranger without her consent and in spite of her resistance, and who reports the crime without delay. By contrast, simple rapes involve a woman who knows her attacker, does not resist physically, and delays reporting. Many would argue that these are the quintessential he said, she said sexual assaults in which the victim claims that she was sexually assaulted, but the suspect argues that the sexual contact was consensual. So sexual assault scholars have documented the pervasiveness of the real rape myth. It affects the attitudes of police, prosecutors, and potential jurors, and it really makes it less likely that the so-called simple rapes will result in arrest and successful prosecution. And the problem with this is that the typical rape is not an aggravated rape committed by a stranger. For example, the study that I conducted in Los Angeles found that only 21% of all rapes reported over a 5-year period to the Los Angeles Police Department were cases involving strangers. So I think it's critically important that cases involving non-strangers, which comprise the overwhelming proportion of all sexual assaults, are also seen as real rapes.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think everybody watching this feels that rape is rape, regardless. Rape is rape. So thank you very much, Doctor. We really, really appreciate your comments and for being part of our report. Alika Kumar, you write in our economics section about pay equity. So here's a question for you. In your article, you share that workers with bachelor's degree earn about double of their coworkers without a college education. But paradoxically, the difference between men's and women's earnings widens with more education. And we absolutely see that disparity here in Arizona. Do you have any theories for why this is that way?
Yes, thank you so much for asking the question. 57% of undergraduate degrees are earned by women and 59% of master's degrees, yet they don't seem to do as well as the men. Caucasian women earn about 83% of what a white man would earn in a year. And with advanced degrees, it goes down to 74%. It's interesting because for women of color, the case is even worse, right? So Black women earn only about 65% and Hispanic women about 58.9%. So if you were to look at it in terms of how long does a woman have to work in order to make the same amount a Caucasian man does, an average white woman has to work a year and 3 months up to March of the following year to earn the same amount. An African-American woman would have to work the entire year and until June the next year. And for a Hispanic woman, all the way to October of the following year. And, this is very striking and it is really unfortunate. However, a lot needs to be done and can be done. Society owes women about $30 trillion in lost wages, right? In Arizona alone, it's about $30 billion for women. That's about $500,000 per woman over her lifetime, right? So what causes these and my theory on this is there is that opportunity gap. So despite education, women seem to rise up the ladder much slower. And it could be because of systemic biases and wage practices. There are different standards for men and women in the way the system is set up, in the way, human resources even search for employees for specific positions. And what's even more interesting to know is that by the time a man reaches the age of 45, about 8% of the men will reach executive level positions, and women only 3% would reach that. And again, one of the reasons I think this happens is there are no labor protections for women. Women tend to carry the major burden of childcare, elderly care at home, and other responsibilities at the home. And also, almost 40% of women are single mothers, which means the burden of, childcare, earning, supporting the family, taking care of their elders, all of that falls upon them. And because there are no labor protections mandated by government, if they don't necessarily have the luxury of flexible work schedules, and many of them work in low-wage industries, which means that if they're not able to do the job, somebody else takes it. And, and for women who have the education, who have their higher degrees, there is the motherhood penalty, right? In a lot of the European countries, you have paid maternity leave for up to 12 weeks. We don't have that in the U.S. So you can get up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave, but, and that can harm women in many ways because you lose the option of getting promotions. You are not able to stay current. And, the employers can see you as a liability if you're, especially at that age where you're having babies. And Bottom line is we need the next generation. We need that. And that's a topic for another conversation. But women have that opportunity gap. They have the motherhood penalty that causes some of the setbacks. In September 2020, last year, 865,000 women left the workforce, not by choice, but because they had to manage all of these responsibilities. Now, that's about 57% of the ratio of working women. That's the lowest it's been since 1988.
Wow.
So really it is important that we build into our systems labor practices, requirements for labor protections for women, so that they can continue to work, stay connected with the workforce, not have to quit because of their responsibilities, which are part of human life.
Well, that is so much information. Thank you for that. You make some excellent points. And for our viewers and listeners, when you look at the report, you'll see some more information in there about the Healthy Families Act, the Fair Pay Act, and some other things that Alika points out that's so very important. I want to go ahead and transition over to Elizabeth Ayers-Pluff, and this has to do with the health and breast cancer. Elizabeth, what would you say is the biggest request for needs that you see at Impact One for women in Arizona? And let me explain that Impact One is an incredible group here in Arizona that really helps women. So Elizabeth, maybe you can explain just a little bit about what Impact One does and then what the biggest need is.
Sure. Impact One Breast Cancer Foundation was really designed to help women wherever they are in their journey. And I've always said to people, there's so many layers to a breast cancer diagnosis, whether it's just treatment options or actual surgeries to remove the actual cancer, and how these women are going to recover from all these options that they have on their plate. Our program provides women with vital essentials that are very costly and often not covered by insurance to women in Arizona that are diagnosed with breast cancer. And so what we're able to do is find out where that woman is in her journey, what is exactly her treatment plan or her plan for this diagnosis, and then we kind of navigate from there as to what we think she might need. From getting a wig to maybe a compression garment for surgery.
I mean, it's amazing what you do. You help so many women in just some very simple ways. What are some of those needs that Impact One has now?
So what we're finding is a lot of women kind of fall into this uninsured, underinsured gap where they're single moms and they have to meet co-pays or they have to get vital items before even surgery begins. And when they have this decision to make their copay for radiation each treatment day versus getting compression garments to recover from surgery, which is months of recovery. It's just not a one-time thing. You've got multiple surgeries with this diagnosis. So we're shipping off products all over Arizona, from the Navajo Nations in a clinic in Tuba City, Casa Grande. We're in all these areas that we know are difficult to get to, and so we're shipping all across the country as we speak.
The hard work you do, the emotional support, the support of these gifts, I know that it means a lot to women, and AFW is so proud to be able to have helped Impact One in your programs. And so thank you for sharing that information with us and for being part of our report and part of our program here today. I want to go ahead and go over to my dear friend, Letitia Fry. Letitia is such a huge part of the community here in Arizona and other places too. In fact, she helped us with our big annual event, and she sees so many nonprofits and the struggles that women go through in our community. Letitia, you have an article in the report that talks about the tsunami effects of COVID-19, and that really hit me. Can you explain what you see happening now and what we can expect to come?
Thanks, Monica, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel. I've enjoyed so many of the things that I've learned today. And, you know, as people that know or may not know me as someone that they call the auctiontainer, combining entertainment and auctions, it also means that I go out into the field. And it means that I study and volunteer with those people that we are seeking to raise money for. And in your case, that would mean someone like Impact One or Live and Learn and a variety of other nonprofits. And what has happened is that, of course, in the beginning of the pandemic, we really weren't gathering in person. I really wasn't on the front lines. And then I went to do an event, and in the space of one day, I went from homeless shelter with Homeward Bound to St. Vincent de Paul to, one of our crisis nursery, and then on to a boys and girls. And it was overwhelming. I actually had told you that day I could barely speak when I got home. And what I've started to notice is that these are normally a very impactful journey for me on a regular basis. But because of the pandemic, it wasn't so much even the number of people in tsunami that's coming towards these nonprofits due to the fact of economic insecurity and also a variety of changes in people's lifestyles or possibly even career. It also had to do with the limited resources the actual charities themselves had due to not being able to fundraise, not being able to accept donations or gifts from the outside. Putting those two together is an astronomical disaster. A lot of what I've seen since then, and since April 23rd to December 6th, I did 45 virtual events. And again, that requires that I go out there. Most of what I'm seeing on who's being hit the hardest are women and children. And what I mean by that is that you have an increasing number of people that are entering into either homelessness, economic insecurity, domestic violence, a variety of the things that you actually impact upon health, economic security, and of course safety, and they are coming for the first time. They're newcomers to this community, if you will, that already exists. Then you take about 30% of those that are already in that community that are working towards getting on their feet, and they fell back in. So now what you have are those that you were working to get on their feet that come back and those that are entering in for the first time. And it is a virtual tsunami that's only just begun to touch point. In that article, and you and I had spoke earlier in the year when we talked about it, things like the delay in evictions and unemployment. In fact, one of your groups you support was one of my favorite, Live and Learn. How hard it was to explain to women that were trying to get on their feet, please don't take that unemployment check. I know it's more money than the job that you can take, but the job that you can take is not going to end unless something happens. The checks will. It is imperative that you understand to take the long-range game, not the short. This kind of pivot or pirouette, if you will, from both the nonprofits themselves to help people to understand, don't take the easy road. How many of us back in March of last year thought, well, there's no way by November that we'll still be doing this. Then by November, we thought, well, I guess we're doing this through the spring. I told many of my clients back in the beginning, act as if we're never going back to normal and proceed that way. That's kind of what's had to happen for people that are dealing with women on the forefront. The other thing is that, Monica, in the past just 2 days alone, I get texts from people that say, I have a woman that works at my company. She's in a domestic violence situation. None of us have ever handled this. What do I do? They don't know the hotlines. These are very common out there resources that are still unknown by groups of people in particular demographics that feel it does not affect them. They think that if I'm in a certain subset or perhaps I'm running this great business, how could that possibly be in my backyard? Thanks to the pandemic, not only is it the person that you can identify, it's the woman that you probably would never suspect that has joined that ever-growing group.
You know, Letitia, you really opened my eyes and a lot of other people's eyes about what's going on in our community in the past and presently. And thank you so much for being part of that community and continuing to open others' eyes and keeping us informed of what's going on. You really are a shining star for our community, so thank you. I want to ask Dr. Belinda Barclay-White. Now, she was able to join us. She's on the phone. But she contributed in our report about breast cancer, and she has some very interesting points that she makes about the screening process in the report. Now, Doctor, can you explain something that I found very interesting, on a high level, the benefits of cryotherapy for breast cancer treatment? And I bring this up because I think that's something that a lot of people watching this don't know that even existed.
So cryotherapy has been used for years, for instance, for small skin cancers, right? It's also been used in the prostate, in kidneys, livers, and lungs. And very recently, within the last 4 or 5 years, we are using it to treat breast cancer. We've treated benign tumors such as fibroadenomas for 15 or 20 years, but fairly recently we have started treating very successfully small breast cancers. So when cancers are found early, they're more likely to be a lower grade, slower growing situation. And these cancers can now be treated by introducing a probe, just like we do an ultrasound-guided needle biopsy, but instead of doing a biopsy, now these patients are coming with a positive biopsy for cancer, and we can put a cryoprobe, so another needle through the middle of these tiny cancers, and then we freeze them. Basically, we create this ball of ice.
Good evening. I'm Andrea Whitsett, a proud Arizona Foundation for Women board member, where I have the privilege of co-chairing the Research, Advocacy, and Programs Committee.
Sorry about that. That was one of our hiccups we talked about. Please continue, Doctor.
So basically we can put a probe. It's just like we do an ultrasound-guided biopsy. We perform them in an outpatient setting with no general anesthesia. It's a local anesthetic. The procedure takes about an hour. The probe is introduced through a tiny skin incision, so there are no sutures. Recovery is very fast. Patients walk out an hour or so later with a big cold breast and an ace bandage, but pain is relatively painless, because cryotherapy, the freezing actually numbs the nerve endings as we go. So most patients may not need any anesthesia at all that night. A couple of extra strength Tylenol is the most that anyone has ever taken. And basically the recovery is really quick. The advantage is we're not giving a general anesthetic. So some women are sick for other reasons and can't have general anesthesia. So we started treating those women with cryotherapy and realized how successful it is, and have now been offering it to newly diagnosed low-grade cancers in women over the age of 55.
So, Doctor, before we even get to that stage, we have to get women to go in for the pre-screening and to follow up with their doctors and go in for those annual exams. Women haven't been doing that due to the pandemic. How do you recommend that we encourage our fellow women to go ahead and go to the doctor and keep those appointments and get that pre-screening?
So yes, for a while, screening was totally put on hold. Back in March, most of the centers doing screening mammography closed. But they're all back up now, and unfortunately trying to catch up with the backlog. But screening mammography, screening ultrasound is definitely available now. And obviously the advantage of doing that is that you have a higher chance of picking up something when it's really small, so it's going to end up either in a smaller surgery or possibly a cryotherapy. So I strongly encourage women not to give up on screening. It's very important, because we can find them so much smaller than when they eventually feel them.
All right. Doctor, thank you so much for persevering and figuring out a way to get on with us today. I know technology can be a pain sometimes, but we really appreciate not only you contributing to our report with some incredibly important information, but also being with us today. So thank you so much for that. I want to go over to Eric Bauer and Susanna Southworth. Your article in our report talks about sex trafficking, and it's something that most people just don't want to talk about. It's kind of like, I don't want to see it, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to think about it, because it's just so awful. But you have thought about it a lot, and you did something amazing with, I believe it was called Backpage, right? Backpage.com. Tell us a little bit about what you did with that, but also what you're tackling now to help end sex trafficking with technology.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having us. And yeah, sex trafficking is awful, as we all know. And most normal people don't know much about it. I mean, why would you? The first thing I'm going to say is the average age of entry into the world of sex trafficking for a victim is 12 to 13 years of age, according to the Department of Justice. It's kids. And Polaris Project puts it at 15 years, but they all say it's kids. Every one of them, they're minors. And so when you think of an escort or a lady of the night or something like that, however it's popularized in Hollywood or wherever, think of a 12-year-old. Think of a 13-year-old, because that's who is getting into what they call the game, and they're getting recruited. They don't volunteer for this. There's not a 7th grade kid in the world that wants to go have sex with some overweight 58-year-old man. I mean, nobody, right? I mean, nobody. But that's what it is. That's what it's all about. And they get recruited by professional adult sex traffickers, often known as pimps. And, so a 34-year-old guy versus a 13-year-old girl, guess who wins? And the techniques they use for recruitment, they're horrific. I mean, they have what they call Romeo pimps, and there are literally organizations out there where they bring in these young, cute guys, say 22, 23-year-old guy with a diamond earring and a sparkly smile and some charisma, and they call them Romeos, and their job's to go out and get the girls, to Romeo them in, as they say. And as they say later on, one and you're done. One and you're done. And that's what, it's true. It's just the way it works. Sex trafficking is huge. There's 2 major criminal industries in the United States and indeed in the world. Drug trafficking being number 1 and sex trafficking being number 2. And, in terms of money, in terms of victims, in terms of human carnage, that's the way it is. A lot of girls die in the world of sex trafficking. They figure the average life expectancy is 7 years. So, I mean, it's really horrific. Why do they do it? It's called trauma bonding. We've heard some people speaking about domestic violence tonight, and that's a real thing. And we all kind of know the person that keeps going back to her husband, even though he beats the heck out of her, and she'll show up in court the next day and say, "Oh, he didn't mean it." Well, there's some trauma bonding going on there. The pimps use that dynamic. That's the tool of the trade for them. They study it. They excel at it. They're professionals at it. Whereas the husband, he's an amateur. He's an amateur. He doesn't even really realize what he's doing, probably. But the pimps, they get it, they exploit it, and that's what they do. They use other techniques such as, and pardon the language, but they call them bottom bitches. And that's the girl that is in the stable of the trafficker. That's what they call it, a stable, like animals, And so the girl that's been there the longest, the most trusted girl of the pimp, they'll use them to go and recruit the new victims. Yeah. So it's the 19-year-old girl who is at the homeless youth shelter. This is one of my cases that approaches the 14-year-old and says, "Oh, honey, da-da-da-da-da. Boy, this place is sure boring. I know where a party is. We could smoke some weed. These guys are really cool." Wow. And there you go into a life of rape and a horrendous life. And these kids it's important to know that these kids are getting raped. We have cases, 20, 30 guys a day, literally coming in, doing whatever they want with the 7th grader, with the 8th grader, like that. And I'm not exaggerating at all. It got worse. The older method of trafficking, of marketing these girls, these kids, was what they called the track. Go up and down the street. Every community had their streets, right? Before that, it was the brothel and political stuff, leaned on them and, morphed into the tracks. Well, the track got replaced with the internet. And the internet got dominated by Craigslist, number 1. Number 2, Backpage. Backpage, the guys that own it, right there in Phoenix, Arizona. And they're getting prosecuted currently by the United States Attorney's Office in Phoenix, Arizona. And it's about high time. We took them on first on a civil case. I was representing 2 7th grade girls and a 9th grader that were advertised on Backpage. Time and time again, they were controlled by adult pimps. The ads would be 4 or 5 pictures of a 7th grader in skimpy underwear with like her butt pointed at the camera, that sort of thing. One of the taglines, again, forgive the language, it read, "Ass up, face down, come see Tasha, $80 specials." My client, this little girl, said, yeah, the phone would start ringing in under a minute. Mm-hmm. It would start ringing all day long, and the trafficker would just line them up. And it's the amazing outreach of the internet in terms of marketing. It just worked. And that and the fact that everyone has a smartphone in their pocket, and the access was just so easy. So that exploded. We worked very hard for over 6 years on that case. We ended up winning a huge motion, CDA 230. It's a federal statute that protects websites, and we blew through that, and that was good. We also have more recently won that same motion against Craigslist. First time that's ever happened. Mm-hmm. But these websites were doing all this stuff with, I like to say, immunity and impunity, because the law, until we got it, our theories at least listened to, was allowing them to do that without any fear of reprisal. So that's some good news. Is we helped write a statute which President Trump signed into law, and that took care of a whole lot of the websites. They're just gone. Your U.S. attorney down
in grateful that you did that.
Thank you. Yeah, it made a big difference, quite honestly. And, it just nationwide, there were a lot of people focused in on that. And we helped write the law, and it was enacted. All my clients were in the Oval Office when the president signed it into law. So that was pretty cool.
How exciting. Eric, you talk about a difference that this has made. And I guess I want to ask your lovely colleague sitting next to you, Susanna, and you had mentioned before we started this that you have really started dedicating your life to this endeavor of trying to end sex trafficking or stop it any way possible. What are some insights you could give us to help just us regular people identify sex trafficking, or at least help those people and groups that are trying to stop it?
Absolutely. Well, and first off, thank you so much for having us. It's a privilege to be here and to talk about this such important issue, and it's near and dear to my heart as a mother, attorney, and professor. And in terms of the education piece, that is so important. And in our litigation, a part of the mission is to educate judges, courts, other attorneys on what is child sex trafficking and what are the signs of it, because we're going after corporations, entities that are profiting from the child sex trafficking, in which they know it's happening, they're profiting from it. So that education piece is so important in our litigation, as well as these types of presentations and publications. We're doing research and writing, which this platform here in Arizona is supporting. So also talking to the nonprofits that are involved in other aspects of these cases and helping these survivors with other parts of their life that we don't have the time or resources to help with. So that education piece, going out, filtering out into the public, and then ultimately pushing new legislation to stop this crime. And in terms of helping survivors, they need safety, they need trust. So when you meet a man or a woman that has been trafficked, to provide a safety net, and for me, I guess, with our clients, they know I'm here for them. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to see sometimes these cases can take a few years. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to see this to the end. I'm a safe person to talk to about this. And I just try to listen more than I speak, and provide them that safety, that network of individuals that are safe to talk to. So if we can all do that.
Yeah, that is such great advice, something that we all need to hear. And thank you so much for fighting that fight, and please continue to do so. I want to thank all of our speakers today. We are so grateful to have you. Thank you for your time and insight into these challenges that women face in our community. I now want to go ahead and introduce you to Andrea Whitsett. She's a dedicated board member here at AFW and a co-chair of the committee that put the report together.
Good evening. I'm Andrea Whitsett, a proud Arizona Foundation for Women board member, where I have the privilege of co-chairing the Research, Advocacy, and Programs Committee with Maureen Busseletti, who you heard from earlier. I'm so pleased you could join us this evening, and I hope you found the research highlights and conversation as impactful as I did. I want to extend a huge thank you to our guest speakers and chapter authors for sharing their time, talent, and expertise with us. And thank you to the AFW staff and everyone who volunteered to make this report possible. It was a true labor of love. In fact, we gathered so much data that in addition to the beautifully designed report, we are also releasing a supplemental set of metrics for all of you data lovers out there that you can access on the research tab of our website. As someone who is deeply passionate about the safety, health, and economic empowerment of Arizona women, I believe it is critical that we use data as a guiding compass to direct our passion into meaningful action. If we want to see the status of women in Arizona improve, we must start by understanding where we are today. Then we must share that knowledge by raising everyone's awareness of both the bright spots and the challenges faced by Arizona women. Because I know, just as you do, that when society is finally equitable for women, when it supports their health, ensures their safety, everyone will benefit. I invite you to join me in spreading this message through facts and your own personal stories. Together, our voices are powerful, and Arizona Foundation for Women is here to amplify them. So what is your call to action today? First, I encourage you to download the research report using the link on this screen or by visiting the website. You'll also receive the report linked to your email tomorrow, and then share it with at least 5 people in your life who you believe would benefit from its content. Second, please help us make this a must-read for Arizonans by posting to your social media and tagging us. For instance, share a data point from the report that's especially meaningful to you and encourage your friends and followers to do the same. You can view our social media links to the far right of your screen, and don't forget to use #SheCountsAZ. Third, support our numerous efforts, including grant making to women-centered nonprofits, leadership training and development for women, research, advocacy, and our signature She Talk forums by becoming a member or making a donation today. There is a button on your screen so you can take action now. And lastly, I invite you to join us at our next virtual event, which will be held February 25th, and it's a She Talk on the topic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, featuring local academic and legislative experts and community leaders. Personally, I have found my engagement with Arizona Foundation for Women to be deeply rewarding because it is truly aligned with my values. Like you, I care about many dimensions of the community and I engage in various efforts, but this is the one thing I do that is singularly focused on women, elevating women, empowering women, supporting women, and that matters. I want everyone to know that we are here to be your ally and champion, and together we can raise the status of all women in Arizona. Thank you so much, and on behalf of AFW, we sincerely appreciate your support.
Wow, what a fantastic program this has been, full of information, insight, and love for our community. Thank you to all of our authors, sponsors, and our speakers, and most of all to you for sharing your time with us today. As they say, it takes a village, and we need all of us to stand together for the safety, health, and economic empowerment of women in our beautiful state. As Andrea said, we need you to get involved. Please visit azfw.org and help us make She Counts in Arizona. Good evening.